Before I start, I'd just like to congratulate you on the magnificent restoration of your church. I can't imagine what it might have been like, or we can't imagine long time ago when folks walked in here for the first time and saw newly installed windows. There's nothing like clean stained glass windows that have been restored. So I wish you well in your praying and in your believing here. We gather today to celebrate a solemn feast, the feast of St. Peter and Paul. It's a feast day that's always celebrated on June 29th, which is most of the time a weekday, and every so many years it's a Sunday. So it's not a feast that we all celebrate every year. This is one of those years when we do. We celebrate the feast day of two personalities that we already know a bit about from our faith heritage. And so it could be good just to think about what we know about these two. What we know about Peter, a fisherman, hard-working guy, in business with his brother. I often like to think of St. Peter as the patron saint of all of us, because he's the guy not unlike most of us, and we have documents in the scriptures of the kind of a say the wrong thing, do the right thing kind of guy. Sometimes recorded as the guy who puts his foot in his mouth, says the wrong thing at the wrong time. He's the guy on the mountain with Jesus and James and John during Transfiguration. He sees Jesus speaking with Moses and Elijah. It's just he and two other guys up there with him. He wants to capture the moment and save it. So he responds to that like a hard-working guy might and said, we're going to build 3 tents, one for each of you, so we'll keep this just the way it is. He's the disciple who was married. We know that for fact because they told us the story of him curing his mother-in-law. We call him the first pope. They didn't use the word pope in those times, but the future popes inherited and share the title with him. Most importantly, what do we know about him? Every year we remember and are reminded that he was the guy who backed down when confronted about his faith. And we read every year, he denied that he was a follower or a friend of Jesus, said loudly, and it's recorded in Scripture, when they pushed him on it, he said, I do not know that man. We hear, it was part of the readings last evening for the vigil of this feast day, the powerful story of Peter being forgiven by Jesus. Jesus asked Peter the question in their ritual of reconciliation, if you will. Peter, I know everything you've said or done. I have a question. Do you love me? And when Peter affirmed his love for Jesus, Jesus responded to that by giving Peter his mission, the mission given to all of us. Tend my sheep, feed my lambs, take care of one another. If you love me, then love each other. And they go together like that, and there isn't one without the other. And so every one of us are on a journey to accomplish the mission. And every one of us share together the effort that it takes to even come close to doing what Jesus expects. And again, in that same scripture, there's good old Peter being just like us. He gets irritated with Jesus because he asked him the same question 3 times. We can almost hear Peter saying to Jesus what many of us have said to someone else on many occasions in our lifetime. How many times are you going to ask me that? He's just like us. We know Peter as St. Peter. We also know that just like us, he wasn't always a saint. And then we remember Paul. Paul was a prominent, well-known expert in the Jewish law, an official of the synagogue, well-known preacher, teacher, and a fierce and at times violent leader of the movement to suppress those followers of Jesus. A strong leader of the opposition to any changes in their religious beliefs or customs. And with self-righteous indignation, he violently tried to suppress the efforts of the disciples of Jesus. That might sound a bit remote from us, but have you ever been in a room with a half a dozen Catholics who start talking the pros and cons of the changes in the church? I don't mean the building changes. We get violent verbally with one another about things that don't matter. Get 3 people who wouldn't think of taking communion on the tongue and 3 people who wouldn't think of taking it in the hand. Give them a glass of wine and some chip and dip and they could go at it for hours. And it's laugh. We say, yeah, that's just the way we are. But what it reveals, like for Paul, his opposition to nothing can change. The temple's always been this way. It's the only way we've ever done it, and so we can't do it any other way. Centuries of waiting for the Messiah, and when someone who's got more evidence that this might be the one than anybody that came along for centuries, then the opposition came in and said, no, we'd much rather be waiting for the Messiah than have him here talking direct to us and calling us anything. Paul, at that stage of his life, was very intelligent, not always very nice. He bragged of his successes in silencing the early Christian community. We also know about him from the powerful stories that he wrote and that the apostles wrote about how his conversion happened. Not because somebody gave him a new lesson or talked him out of one thing into something else, but like us, his conversion happened when he had a personal encounter with the risen Jesus. He almost kids about it sometimes. The risen Jesus knocked him off his horse. He landed on his back on the ground. But after that, even though he had been knocked from his horse, he'd never again ride in terror against anyone. He was blinded with the sores on his eyes and would never again see humanity or religion in the same way. Rather, his power that he held sway with over others gave way to his being willing to accept care in his blindness and in his injury. He accepted care from strangers. And that's our heritage. In all of that, we discover our own experiences of being forgiven and called to mission. What a necessary feast for us to celebrate and also to imitate. In our time and place, in the world that we all, at this time in history, happen to be part of. Jesus asks us, do you love me? And our answer is not in the words that we might say to answer that question. We respond, the only way to respond to the Lord is in what we're willing to do for others. And in our openness to, as difficult as it is, to one day be willing and able to accept all persons as our sisters and brothers. That's the message of Jesus, that's the proclamation of the apostles, that's the lives of the saints, it's the mission that we're called to. We'll never do it perfectly, but that fact doesn't relieve us of the burden and the challenge and the opportunity to take on that mission. Jesus called Peter to that mission during their reconciliation, and it's no more or less than what Jesus calls all of us to do. Jesus asked Paul why he was persecuting him and his followers because of some new or different ways of living their faith. I got a little more than 50 years of hanging out on a regular basis with church folks. We all know how to go to it when the subject of changes comes up. I was ordained in the early days of the implementation of the reforms in the church from the Second Vatican Council. There were rules about who you talked to and what you talked about way back then. My mother in the 60s had an ultra-conservative Republican husband. She had 2 kids in college at the same time. And at one point, she made a declaration. If you want Sunday dinner, there'll be no church talk and no politics talk at my dinner table. So those kinds of things have the same power now as they had then. Jesus told the people that he talked to, and he asked them the same things that he talks to us about and tells us about and asks of us. We live in a time when all are either friends or enemies. The world is sorted out now. There's no in between. You're either with me or against me. You see it the way I see it, or there's something wrong with your thinking, and we're all like that. We're all like that. Nobody can say, well, I'd never be like that. I'm just a wonderful, open-minded person. No, we're not. We're human beings. And we find it much easier to follow Jesus' invitation to get along if we could just get them to see it our way. Everything would be fine. And that goes way back in our tradition. That's just modern time, not just now, these particular times. I remember a nun in grammar school 70 years ago telling us, she first made us hold our hand up if we had a relative that wasn't Catholic. And there were a whole bunch. I had a Lutheran grandpa. So yeah, I'm thinking, oh, she wants to hear about grandpa. She then told us that all those relatives of ours who weren't Catholic, they were really just fallen away Catholics, and all they had to do was get a priest and make a good confession and come back to the right church, and everything would be fine. Those were the days before Pope John opened our hearts and minds, and we were taught, it was drummed into us. We were the one true church, and all the rest were imitators. All the rest were fallen away. All the rest had given up something that we had. But what changed that kind of thinking? Like in my life, my experience of my grandpa, who happened to be a Lutheran, had a lot more authority than what Sister said about Protestants. Just like Paul's experience of Jesus gave him the insights that he needed. But in our culture, in our families, in our politics, and in our religion, we too often use that word enemy to describe those who have a different opinion or different politics or different religious beliefs or customs. We know that when we pay attention to the things that we good Catholics argue about, especially if the subject of change comes up. We all have made choices about who we talk politics with, and every one of us has opinions about people that disagree. But Jesus taught Peter and Paul and us that the word enemy is never to be our preferred word for describing any one of our sisters and brothers in the family of God. But rather to remember that he gave all of them and ourselves new eyes and new hearts. And we hear his words at every Mass when we remember that he said, and we quote him right before communion, "My peace I leave you, my peace is what I give you." And so we gather on this feast day when we remember and we renew ourselves, and with hope in that gift and that promise from the words of Jesus, we go back to the altar, we give thanks and praise.